All right. So again, welcome everybody to grant search orientation. And I offer this class every month, and I'm always really excited by all the new people that I meet every month who are working on learning about grants and grant seeking. So if you could do me a favor and one, mute yourself if you haven't muted yourself. And then two, if you wouldn't mind putting into the chat who you are, what organization you work with, and any burning questions that you have for me today so that I can answer those. I also want to let you guys know that you are more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question at any time. Feel free to put a question in the chat for me, or you can always just wait and hold your questions at the end. I will be trying to stop periodically too and ask questions. Yeah, it's always great to know what organization you guys are with, and since we're not doing this in person, get a little bit of networking going. So we're going to start off by talking about grants. So that's obviously what we're here to talk about, but I really want you guys to understand by the time we're done that really grants are just one small piece of the fundraising puzzle. So we're going to talk about a lot more, just so that I can provide you with all the information you need to understand grants and grant seeking. And because I'm a librarian, I just love to give you guys as much information as possible. So we're going to dive into some background information about grants, and then we're going to practice searching with the Colorado Grants Guide. And so we're going to talk about what motivates funders, how to evaluate your own organization when it comes to your needs. I'm going to talk a little bit about that prospecting worksheet that I gave you guys. And of course, as I said, we're going to search with Colorado Grants Guide. And I've also got some other outside resources that I really want to share with you guys. And let's see, and I'm just going to look at the chat real quick. So we've got Infinite Hope and Restoration Ministries. You guys are 501c3. You're the founder. Great. Welcome. CASA of the Pikes Peak region. Great. An amazing organization. Community Health Partnership. Fabulous. And Catamount. Great. Well, welcome everybody. Super, super excited to have you guys all here. And real quick, I guess I should introduce myself. As you guys know, I'm Katie Edson. I am the nonprofit librarian for the Pikes Peak region. I always like to say that my job is to give people in our community the information they need to do good. And I love doing this job. I love meeting all these people who are doing such great work in the community in which I live. And so I so appreciate what you're doing to make where I live a better place. I've been a librarian for, I guess, about 11, 12 years now. I've kind of done it all, I feel like, from K through 12 to standard adult reference work, to being an academic librarian, including being a patent and trademark librarian. So when I was an academic librarian, I helped I helped staff and faculty finding grants. It's a little different than finding with private funders, which is what we're going to be talking about, but there's still a lot of overlap. And so that's how I got into this position. So here we've got this great pie chart, and I like to show this pie chart to folks because I want you to just take a look, and we've got this enormous piece, almost 70%. And this is new data. This is coming from Giving USA, and they put this together every year. I will tell you that these numbers rarely change. I mean, so this 68% might go up to 70%, but generally sticks around, the 68 to 70%. And I like to ask people what they think, who represents this really big piece of the pie. Are we talking about foundations? Are we talking about corporations, bequests, or individuals? And there are a lot of people who are surprised to find out that that individuals give the most. That is who is contributing the most to nonprofits. And as we can see, over $470 billion in contributions were given in 2021 to nonprofits, but over 324 billion was actually from individuals. And I like to say that dead people give more than even corporations. So when we're talking about bequests, in case you don't know, that's when those people leave money or property to a nonprofit in their will. And that's a really wonderful way to continue to give back. And there are individuals who specialize in working with folks, because it can be kind of complicated when we're talking about stocks or, like I said, property bequests. So this is kind of a new chart that Giving USA has been putting together, and I think it's really interesting to see. And this is the new one, and I got rid of the last year's to put up new data. But what's interesting about this is where are the charitable dollars going? And so we can see that religion went up by 5.4%. So that's quite significant. Education went down. Now, after COVID, arts, culture, and humanities, that went down significantly. And that was really to do with the fact that people weren't able to go to theater productions anymore. We couldn't go to museums. So all the tickets money from ticket prices, they didn't get anymore. So it's good to see that this year, this recent data, it's gone up considerably. So that's really great to see. Again, what we're looking at and what I'm trying to get you to understand is that a lot of people think that they just need to get a few big grants to support their nonprofit organization. But it's just so important to know that that's not the only part of your income for your nonprofit. If we take a look at nonprofits in the United States, you're really going to see that foundations and corporations, it's really only a modest proportion of charitable giving. So we really need to look at who's giving. And if you think about it, there are more people in the world than foundation and corporations put together. And individuals like you and me, we are giving to our favorite organizations. So maybe we're giving to the zoo, or maybe we're giving, to our church. And that is often starts off small. I love to use a public radio as an example. They're saying, just give us whatever you can. And you start off maybe $5, right? But with time, your gifts might grow. And so when you cultivate those individuals, those become the backbone of your nonprofit. And so again, while foundation giving may be just one component of your overall grant seeking strategy, just remember you need people to support you. And we're going to talk a little bit later, but private funders, they really like to see who your base is. So, we talked about, we started looking at the big picture of all types of nonprofit revenue. So now we're looking at the nonprofit sector as a whole. So fees for goods and services, which is known as earned income, is really going to be the largest category of revenue. So when we talk about earned income, we're specifically talking about the revenue generated from the sale of goods and services. And my favorite example is Girl Scout cookies. So if you've ever bought a box, you've contributed to the Girl Scout organization. And that's this big, tall bar right here. And fees for services and goods from the government, that's mostly going to be like, we're talking Medicare and direct grants and things like that. So that would be like public universities that are supported by taxpayers in the state and receive government grants for research. Institutional grant makers like foundations, they fit into the private contributions category right here, which includes foundations as well as corporations and individual donors. So that's the reporting revenue. And I know this is saying 2013, but it is the this is the most recent data that's out there. So all right, so going on, not all private foundations are the same. So I just want to go over so that you know about the different types of foundations, so that when you are searching for grants, these are going to come up, and you're going to see the different types of foundations. And I just really want you to have a little bit of a background so that when these pop up, you know what they're talking about. So you don't, first of all, the term foundation in an organization's name does not necessarily mean that it gives money away. So we could talk about the UC Health Memorial Health Foundation. They're not giving away money. And then we could conversely say some private foundations with significant grant making initiatives don't have the word foundation in their name at all. And so examples of the big ones are like the Carnegie Corporation or Duke Endowment. In addition, there's various types of grant makers. So we've got private foundations, which are probably the type that most of you have heard about, but there's actually independent foundations. And those are grant making organizations whose funds are generally derived from an individual or a group of individuals, and they're distinct from other kinds of private foundations like family or corporate foundations in that they are not governed by the benefactor, the benefactor's family or corporation. And a good example is the Ford Foundation. Family foundations are usually funded by an endowment from a family. And with family foundations, the family members of the donors have a substantial role in the foundation's governance and often include the family name. And again, some of the biggies are the Gates and the Ford and the Kellogg and the MacArthur, but really a vast majority of them are very small family foundations. And many of these small family foundations don't have staff, which is the reason why some only accept applications by invitation only, and we'll talk about that later. And let's see. Then going on, corporate sponsored foundations. So those are also called company sponsored foundations. And they are private foundations, but they derive grant funds from contributions from a for-profit business. And a company sponsored foundation, it's probably going to retain close ties with the donor company, but it really is an independent organization, and it's got its own endowment and board of directors and is subject to the same rules and regulations as private foundations. And then an operating foundation, this last one, it works a little differently. So an operating foundation may award some grants, but the total is generally small and in relative to the funds for the foundation's own programs. And so I like to use a couple examples is the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. So when you go there and you buy some lettuce and you feed the giraffes, that money is going back into their own foundation, but they are not then handing out grants to outside organizations. That money is going back in for their own programs. Another one is the Pikes Peak Library District Foundation. They also, right, you buy some books from the Friends of the Library, that money goes back into the library for its own programming, like the summer reading program. I did leave one off of the slide, and maybe I should add it, but that's international foundations, and they don't come up that often with folks that come in to the library, but they're typically foundations that are, as you can imagine, based outside the United States that make grants in their own countries and overseas. So the term international foundation, it just is going to refer to foundations in any country that primarily engages in cross-border giving. And I suppose also I don't have listed here are public charities, and those are, say, like nonprofit universities, hospitals, and schools. So those usually also don't come up. I will say that I have had a little bit more, I've had a few people actually ask me about international foundations lately. I had somebody who wants to start a chicken farm in Africa. I mean, not Africa, in India. And so they're looking for international funding for that. So now that we know a little bit about the different types of foundations you're going to be researching and approaching, we're going to take a quick look at some of the factors that might motivate them to give. So first and foremost, when the US government grants an organization tax-exempt status, it expects the foundation to use its money to do good for society. And to make sure that happens, the government requires the foundation to spend at least part of its assets each year for charitable purposes. That rule is called the Payout Requirement, and it's generally 5%. It can be a little bit more if they're feeling generous. So private foundations, this first one, right? They primarily want to fulfill philanthropic goals and interests while supporting a variety of issues through some kind of objective process. So remember that each foundation is going to have specific goals and interests, just like you do. So one of the main purposes of doing thorough research before you approach a potential funder is, and that's going to help you identify how you can align your goals and interests with them. So I'm going to talk a lot about doing your research because that's so important. You're trying to find a perfect match between a funder and yourself. Grant making public charities. So those are super visible in the community. And they too want to assist a wide variety of issues and population groups within the communities. Though they tend to be large churches, hospitals, like medical research organizations that are affiliated with hospitals, schools, colleges, universities, and then corporations. I'm sure you can imagine, as we talked about before, corporate funders, they tend to have a little bit more than just pure philanthropic interests, right? They want to give money to nonprofits to help advance their business objectives and increase their visibility and enhance their image, which is great because they're still giving back to the community where their employees and consumers live and work. So that was a whole lot about just a background so that you know when we're talking about the difference between a private foundation and a corporate foundation. So is there any questions on any of that I just really kind of raced through? Okay. So now the part that I hate to talk about, but is so important. Grant seeking is super competitive. And I want to feel like we in the nonprofit community are all supportive of one another, but it's still really important that we realize that grant seeking is still competitive. So when you're approaching funders for support, you have to prove to them that you are a credible nonprofit organization with the capacity to carry out a well-planned idea, purpose, or project. You must also show that it isn't just about the need of your organization, but the people you are serving and the impact it will make. How is what you're asking for going to change lives? For example, if you're asking for money to renovate a building or hire new staff, what difference will that make in your community and to the people you serve? How will it better help you to achieve or advance your mission, right? How is what you're doing better than anybody else? Because a funder is going to look to see that. They want to see that their money is going to somebody who is making a difference because they have to report back to their board. So the first step of figuring this all out is really to evaluate and your own organization. So you want to know, you want to be able to prove that you have the potential to give. Sorry, I said that wrong. You want to prove to your prospective donors that they want to give to your organization because you are a credible organization. And the best way to do that is an evaluation of your own organization's missions, priorities, and directions. A funding official will first want to be certain that the purpose of, of a nonprofit organization or project matches the funder's interest. That's that match that I mentioned before. Other issues that concern a funder and which help to establish an organization's credibility are, first and foremost, are you a legal nonprofit? So foundations, so private foundations, and we're talking 501c3. Those foundations foundations are required by the IRS to give to a charitable organization for charitable purposes. So they're going to ask you, are you a legal nonprofit? Which means, do you have that 501c3 letter of determination? Foundations cannot give to your organization a grant without it. I do have a lot of people who come to me that are 501c4s or 501c6s. And so those are, say, HOAs. They're looking for grant money for fire mitigation. And it's a struggle for me to help them find grant money because, again, these private foundations have to give to somebody who is a 501c3. Now, occasionally, I can help them find money through a city or a county or some type of federal grant. They have different requirements. But private foundations, as I said, you need to be a legal nonprofit. And secondly, do you have a compelling mission that is compatible with their focus area? So finding out what this particular funder cares about and knowing how your mission and purpose aligns with the funder's interest is essential. It's just an essential part of grant seeking, right? Again, perfect match. I know, how many times can I say that? Do you have strong leadership? So another thing many funders want to see is your list of board members, as well as some information and on the knowledge and experience of your key leaders and staff. So that's part of the grant seeking, the grant writing process. You will more than likely have to add that. Do you provide high quality programming, that meets a need in the community? You're going to have to be able to demonstrate to a funder what you do is better than anyone else. That's goes back to that competitiveness. What's your niche or added value to the field? To fully answer this question, you need to know who your competitors are. Who is doing similar work as your organization? What's different about what you're bringing to the field or in your approach? What need are you responding to that isn't currently being addressed? You must be able to clearly identify and articulate your competitive edge. You also need to demonstrate that what you're doing is having a measurable impact on the people you serve. And again, that will go towards your grant that you write. Being able to demonstrate measurable impact is an important aspect of almost all grants. really important to remember. A grant is an investment, and like any investment, the funder wants to see a high rate of return with low risk. And so what that means to you is that a high rate of return means that you are able to demonstrate a measurable impact. And when we say investment, what is the funder investing in? They're investing in your organization, your mission, your solution, the people you serve, your community. And the term low risk, that goes back to your credibility and capacity to do the work. A funder wants to see a successful track record and a history of success. So to me, those are all just, that's so important to remember as you go through this process. Do you have a history of funding by other sources? And that could be governmental or private. So having a strong organizational and fiscal infrastructure is really important. Having a strong organizational and fiscal infrastructure is important in the terms of capacity, and again, credibility. I keep using that word a lot. It lets the funder know you have the internal resources to get the job done and to manage the grant funds effectively and efficiently. They also want assurances that you have other investors as part of your funding mix and that you are not just relying solely on a grant from them for support. And so that goes back to those 70% of individuals. You are showing to them that you have the backing of the people in your community, and what they're helping with is to add to your funding mix. And so one funder says, I don't want to be your sole funder, right? That's scary to them. I want to know who else is funding you. And again, show that you've got sound fiscal management and a realistic budget, and that you have a strong and involved board. Oh, and of course, committed volunteers. I always forget how many tabs I've got. So any questions about that? That's all just, that's a lot of information packed in there, but it's so important to show that you are credible, because otherwise nobody wants to fund you. Okay. So now you need to identify what your funding needs are, right? Successfully raising funds from foundations and corporations, you need a lot of advanced preparation. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure somebody has a story of like, oh, I found this grant and it's due next week and I managed to get it done. Those are the rare people. Most organizations need, you need to really get your ducks in a row, right? You really need a lot of advanced research on your part. So you need to do that homework, and that includes collecting and organizing and analyzing the data you need. The more thorough you are, the better your chances for success. So there are a lot of important questions that you need to ask yourself before you begin the grant seeking process. And one of those is, why do I need funding and what kind do I need? So you need to determine what you ultimately hope to obtain through private funding. So this means deciding which programs you need to fund and which of these programs take priority. Also, what kind of support do you need? Are we talking general support? Are we talking capital funds, in-kind gifts? Most funders are specific about the kinds of support they will and will not provide. And I'll just tell you a quick little story. I was working with a woman who runs an orphanage in Africa, and she had one source of funding. She had one individual who was funding this orphanage, and that one funder pulled out. And so she had now no funding. And that is probably the worst case scenario ever. She had no idea how to seek any other type of funding. And what she also didn't understand was how to identify what her funding needs were. When I said to her, you know, what are you looking to fund? She said, well, I just need money to run the orphanage. And I said, well, what specifically, how do we break this down? And so we talked about how they were needing to drill a new well for fresh water. And I said, okay, great. That's going to be a funding need that you have. She said, okay, we need to pay our electricity. Okay, maybe we can find another grant for that. Oh, they run a fish farm. I'm like, well, that's a whole nother project. So she needed to look at her organization and needed to see what she needed funding, and we needed to break that down and then look for grants for each project or program. So that's what I'm talking about, is identifying what you actually need to get funded. And I've got direct costs and indirect costs listed here. And I have a whole class that just talks about writing up your project budget. And I go in depth on direct and indirect costs, but briefly, I will just say direct costs, those are the activities or items associated entirely with the project or program. So that could include project materials or program staff or salaries. It is those are fees that pertain only to the program, right? You would not be able to fund this program without these direct costs. Indirect costs, however, include items that are associated with running the organization as a whole. So that could be administrative staff salaries and rent and utilities, office supplies. So your organization may run multiple projects, and your indirect costs are going to go to pay for items associated with multiple projects. So that could be like, I don't know, the copier, all the programs use the copier, not just one project. There's a way to calculate a percentage, and that, again, I talk about in depth in my project budgets class. So now you need to figure out how much you need, right? We're searching for a grant. You want to search for a grant specific to how much you need. So you really need to understand the funding requirements that are necessary to carry out your project. You also should develop an overall fundraising plan. Since, we talked about earlier, right? Foundations aren't going to be the only source of funding. So what else do you have in the mix there? Timing. When do you need the funds, right? Don't say you need it next week. Finding a grant, writing a grant, that's not something you can do in one lunch hour. So think about the entire process from the time you begin your research until the time you actually receive the funding. That could honestly take 6 to 9 months, maybe even a year. So factor that in when you are looking for funding. Make sure, again, you're not choosing one that's scheduled to start next month or something. Give yourself plenty of time to conduct your research. it really is a labor-intensive process. I am on a nonprofit board. I chair their grant committee, and I have a hard time finding grants for my nonprofit, and I'm trying to fit it in my regular day. And here I am, experienced grant seeker, and I have a hard time. So, right, give yourself plenty of time. I'm sure many of you work for small or potentially understaffed organizations. You know, you, like me, you may not have that much time each week that you can devote to research. I like creating a grant timeline. And one of the handouts I gave you guys ahead of time is just a sample grant timeline, just so that you get thinking about how long do I really need to work on searching for my grant? What are the pieces that need to go into this? Let me lay this all out. Who maybe do I need help from? Maybe you need a grant for the third quarter, for your third quarter. How much time do you need to think about that before the third quarter, right? So if you lay this all out, a lot of nonprofits sit down at the beginning of their fiscal year and lay out a grant timeline for their whole year, which I think is a great idea. Also, remember that foundation boards, especially those small ones that I mentioned in the very beginning, they may only meet a few times a year to review grant proposals. So you need to really make sure to pay attention to deadlines, especially when you're pulling up a profile and they say, you know, that the board only meets twice a year. If you miss one deadline, you may have to wait another 6 months before you can apply again. So don't miss a deadline. Any questions about all that? Oh, and I suppose really important here too, your budget and your narrative need to tell the same story. If they don't align, you're not going to get funded. And I go through that a lot. And again, in my budget class. Any questions? Okay. So funding partners. The goal of your research is to focus on the match between your organization's need and the funding interests of a grant maker. And from that, you're going to develop a list of prospects. To help you get a little organized in the handouts, I included a worksheet, which is one way of keeping track of your prospects. You know what? Some people use index cards. There's a lot of really great software out there. If your organization is large enough and can afford grant software, go for it. But do use whatever works for you. Just make sure you're organized and that you keep some sort of record of work so that you don't get lost. And I've taken my prospect sheet and I converted into an Excel spreadsheet, and I use that to keep track of my grant prospects. And then like I have it as a Google Sheets, and then I can share that Google Sheets with other people in my grant committee. And we can keep track of who's looking at what grants and where we are in the process. Again, if you're in a large organization, you can get grant software that will do the same thing. The main things that you're going to be looking for, though, when you are searching for grants, and again, we'll go into this in a minute when we actually do this live, who is interested in my area of interest? So you're going to need to identify grant makers that have expressed an interest in funding programs in a specific subject field. So boom, subject field right there. You're going to look and read a funder's purpose and activity statement, and that's going to give you some insight into the goals a foundation has set for itself. Second, who is funding in my geographic region? Although there are plenty of funders that give nationally, and even, as I've mentioned, internationally, most funders limit their giving to specific geographic areas. So you're going to need to locate organizations that give right in your community. And that could be, maybe you're just looking Colorado statewide, or maybe you're going to look Colorado Springs or El Paso County. Again, we're gonna go into that as we go into Colorado Grants Guide, but that's the second most important thing after subject area is geographic focus. Then who's going to provide the type of support I need? So you're going to need to find grant makers that provide specific types of support. So is that capital funds? You're putting a new roof on. Is it seed money? You're a brand new nonprofit and you're looking for seed money. Is it operating funds? I'm going to tell you that most funders give funds for program development. That's the sexy thing, right? Some very beautiful, fabulous, well put together program or project, you know, that is going to give you some nice shiny pictures that they can then report back to their board. That's often what funders like to fund, right? They have boards that they have to report back to. It's not so sexy to just give general operating support, right? But you still, it's not to say that you can't find that money, because you can. It's just, you have to remember how you're searching for it. Also, you're going to want to pay particular attention to limitation statement. So does the potential funder have any criteria that would prohibit your organization from obtaining funding? Are there types of support the funder will not provide? These statements will also give you very specific geographic funding priorities. So usually, yeah, and indicate whether or not a foundation is accepting proposals. So sometimes you're going to see that it does not, they're not accepting unsolicited proposals. That's not, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I don't want that to keep you from thinking about that organization, because they still could be an important fit for you. All right, so I talked about the prospect worksheet a little bit. Really, it's important just to track however it works for you. What I think is important is to state why it is or isn't a good fit. Sometimes you get just down this rabbit hole of looking at funders that leads you to looking at another funder, and all of a sudden you're sort of lost, and then you start your search all over again and you're like, did I look at this? I totally forgotten. I've already looked at 50 funders. I don't remember. Was this a good fit or not? So if you just take some notes, I looked at this funder, not a good fit. Why? And so then if they come up in another search, you go, oh, that's right, I looked at them. They're not a good fit because, you know. So it'll save you time in the long run. Stay organized. All right, so look for the right opportunities. Not all grant opportunities are going to be right for you. I will tell you, the very first grant I applied for way back when, I was in a somewhat affluent neighborhood where my library was located, and I wanted to see if I could find a grant to get some computers, and I applied for a grant, but the grant really was wanting to only give to libraries that were located in low income areas. And I tried to sort of make us fit, and guess what? I didn't get the grant, and it was a waste of my time, and it was a waste of the grant reviewer's time. So make sure you only apply to those grant opportunities that are the best fit for you. Remember, I talked about how you have limited time and resources. Use your time wisely. Again, don't apply for something that isn't a good fit because it's just a waste of time. Think about it. If you receive a grant but can't follow through, it's going to hurt your reputation and your future chances of funding. The grant community, or even though the nonprofit community here in El Paso County is about 5,000 nonprofits, the funding community is small, and word will get out if you don't follow through with your grant. Again, this goes back to time. Don't be a grant factory. Be strategic in those grants that you apply to. You just don't want to apply to every grant you see. That's not an efficient way to get a grant. Okay, I'm going to kind of skip the next slides because in fact, I need to update this slide. This is just because I'm going to give you guys these slides. I'll email them to you, but they just kind of show you how to go about with screenshots, how to access the grant database. So this is what the Colorado Grants Guide looks like, and we're going to get in there. And these are my guides that I have. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of this real quick. And we're going to go to the library's website. So if you want to do this along with me on your computer and you have a library card, feel free to do it as well. And if I go too fast and you're following along, let me know and I will stop and, and wait. And because I want to make sure everybody knows how we're doing this. So first and foremost, we are at ppld.org. This is the Pikes Peak Library District's homepage. And if we click on research, you can see we've got all databases, but then down here we have nonprofit resources. So I'm going through nonprofit resources because I think this is an easier way. All databases, you can definitely get to Colorado Grants Guide, but it's going to be a alphabetical list. So totally fine, you can do that. But I'm going to go this way. And right here, we've got some tabs. And the second one down here is nonprofit databases. This is my flyer kind of about we just finished that fiscal sponsorship course. That was earlier this week. Down here, I've got links to some more guides. So if you wanted to look at a guide on social enterprise or grant research, so if you can't remember some of the stuff that I'm talking about, you just need to go over to my grant research page and it will guide you through some of this and provide you with some extra resources. Here is a list of just kind of featured resources that I think are the top picks. And that would be the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Candid, they're a 501c3 themselves, and they run Foundation Directory, another grant-seeking database. Candid Learning, this is a great resource. They provide classes, many are free. They have example documents. They are a great educational arm and they're free. Colorado Nonprofit Association, again, an amazing organization that you can go to for help. And CRC America, they are the ones who run Colorado Grants Guide. And if you are going to be using the Colorado Common Grant application, they also use that, are the ones that create that form. So back up to the top here, if I click on nonprofit databases, Colorado Grants Guide is the very first one. This right here is just a PDF of step-by-step directions, which you also got as a handout. So you're going to put in your library card and PIN. Unless you are in our library, then it will connect you automatically. It won't ask you for your library card and PIN. How's everybody doing? Are we good? Just yell out or put in chat if you need me to hang tight for a minute. So this is what Colorado Grants Guide looks like. You're really going to have 3 options for searching. If at any time you have some issues, you hover over support, there's a user guide, you can submit feedback, there's a link to the Colorado Common Grants application, a glossary, all right? You can use this bar and you can just type in a search. And when you type in a search here, it is going to give you results back in both grants and funders. I'm not going to do that because I want to walk you guys through looking at grants and then separately looking at funders. But if you want to use this later on, go for it. So I can click grants or I can click funders, or I can put in a search for grants that support. I could put in anything here. So I could put in libraries if I wanted to. And we see right here, it says loading grants. Over here on the left, you see it inputted my search term. It is showing me that there are 35 grants that have something to do with libraries. It's showing me the first 30. So if I click on that down button, it will, I can say all or whatever I want. There are 533 grants entered into the Colorado Grants Guide. And it looks like there are 35 filtered out of those 533. I'm going to take out libraries because I want to show you how to use the filters on the side. So now it's showing me the first 30 of those 533 grants. So first thing you're going to see is grant activity. And if I click that little plus, if I want, because I'm here a whole lot, I only want to see grants updated in the last 6 months. You could totally do that if you wanted to. I'm not going to bother with that right now. I want you guys to remember that the more filters you use, the smaller your results. And I will tell you that I have put in too many results and I've gotten 0 many, many times. So just remember that. Too broad, and what happens is you get way too many results. So you're trying to find that sweet spot. And that comes with trial and error. I wish I could tell you that there's just some magic button, but there isn't. So you just need to go over this search several times until you really discover that this is the best way for me to search. So that common grant application, if I'm going to use that, and if for folks that don't know what a common grant application is, that means that I have a one application that I have filled out, and I am looking for funders who accept that one form application. Instead of having their own form, they use the common grant application. So if I select that box, that goes down to 32. So there's 32 grants in the system right now that I can use my common grant application. And a common grant application can be, there's good and bad to it. The good is that once I have it done, I just need to make some adjustments and I can send it out faster. The bad is that you really need to write up your grant first, cut and paste it into the Common Grant application. And so you almost have to write it twice. You have to pay very close attention to how many characters are allowed in the Common Grant application. And the kind of weird thing is that if it says that it will accept 500 characters in a box, and you have typed up a section and yours has turns out you have 545 characters. You copy and you paste it in, it will accept all 545 characters. But when it sends it to the funder, it's going to cut it off at 500. So you just really need to pay attention to the details there. So I'm not going to use that filter right now. So I'm going to uncheck that. Application dates. If you are, again, got that grant timeline and you know that you want to search for a grant that is for your fourth quarter, and your fourth quarter is, August 1 to, I don't even know, whatever the end of your fourth quarter would be, you could put those specific dates in, and then the only application dates that you would see would be those within your requested timeline. So now we have grant type, and that's what I was talking about earlier. Are you just looking for project or program support, or are you wanting to build a new building? You've got a new church that you've outgrown your old church. You'd like to either add on to that church, or you want to build a whole new church. That would be a capital improvement or purchase. And so you can choose. And right now I'm not we'll just be generic and we'll put project program support. And then geographic focus. So where is my funding going to take place? And I don't recommend this for international, because what it does is it is going to search all countries, and it's very limited as well. So you can't say I'm looking specifically for funding in Africa or specifically funding in India. I would recommend Foundation Directory for that. So you could say the Denver metro area, right? Or you could say Colorado statewide, or if you check this box, you then get to choose. And I could say, how about El Paso, and let's say El Paso and Teller. So that put me to 33. I haven't put in a subject area, right? Remember, I had libraries, but then I took that out. So down here is my area of interest. And I could choose, and if you see this caret, that means that this is the parent, and the child is underneath. So maybe I am running an after-school tutoring program. I am going to choose education. And now I'm going to see what that's gone down to. So that's given me 5 grants to look at. Maybe I've been too specific about using just El Paso and using El Paso and Teller County. I could change that if I wanted to, but right now let's look. So let's go into one of these, and I'm just going to generically, I'm going to choose Kinder Morgan Foundation and their general grant, and we can see what a grant profile looks like. And so first off, we can visit their website if we want. We're finding out that it's funded by Kinder Morgan. If I click here, that's going to take me to their profile page. I can print this profile if I want. This is telling me when the profile was updated, so it's at least this year. I've got some quick navigation over here if I want, or I can just scroll down. So where do they fund? They fund nationally, They also fund in Colorado counties, and here are the counties. So there's El Paso. So that's why it got picked up. Here's their areas of interest. Oh, look, education, K through 12. That works really well for me and my after school tutoring program. So far, so good. This looks like it might work. So here I'm going to read through the purpose. So it's promoting academic and artistic interests, students K through 12. So far, so good. Grants are between 5 and 20,000. All right, that's great, because I figured out that I need some tablets to be able to do some assessment for my students, and I need these tablets. And I have figured out that I'm going to need $8,000. So it looks like, okay, this is going to be good. Application dates, perfect. I need it August 1st. I can click on that button and I can add it to my calendar if I want. But now I'm going to look at the application criteria. So I'm going to read through this really carefully. I'm going to read through how to apply. And so they want a cover letter. They want a narrative of 3 pages or less. And all right, so you're going to read through and make sure all of this is what you're going to understand all of this and not leave any of it out. And then they have a link, how to submit. And then I'm going to look at my restrictions. So your organization must be located within 30 miles of the following areas of Kinder Morgan operations. Oh, perfect. And I'm going to look through all that. I'm going to look closely at the restrictions, because I want to make sure that I don't fall within any of these restrictions. And so far, I'm thinking this looks really good. And then I've got contact information, and I'm going to pick up the phone, or I'm going to email the contact and communicate with them and start building a connection with them and a relationship, because really the world of grant seeking and grants in general, it's all about relationships. And it's about that relationship that you forge in the very beginning to when you are providing them with your grant reports, to maybe providing them with information about your successes. Maybe you're inviting them to an end of the year party just to celebrate, or an open house. You want to let them know what's going on. So I have a grant right now, and my grant it's coming to the end of its 3-year cycle, and I have some money left over, and I am unable to use some of the money for what it was what the grant was designed for. And that's because of COVID. And so I have decided I would really like to use those funds for something other than what was specified in the grant. So I went to the funder and I said, hey, could I use the grant money for something different? And I let them know what I wanted to use it for. And they just got back to me today and said, yes, I can do that. But it was a relationship that I have with them that I know that I can go and talk to them, because if, again, I'm using the money for anything other than what it was in its intended purpose, they're going to be like, well, you didn't tell me that. And they may not fund me again. So I want to make sure that we always have a great line of communication. So thanks. So yes, I'm going to buy a really nice monitor for the Rob Hilbert room. I'm really excited about that. So that is a grant profile. It's going to leave this tab up. So if I go up here to and go back to the tab, I get back to this page. So now, though, I want to look at funders. And so just as a reminder, up top shows me all my search terms. So if you want to remove them, again, you can remove them with the filters on the side, or you can just X them out. One other thing is over here on the top right, we've got an option to download these into a spreadsheet. And so what you'll get are these 5 grants and their information put into a spreadsheet that you can save, which I think is really great. In fact, it's a great way to start your prospect sheet if you want to use it in spreadsheet form. So let's hop over to funders unless anyone has any questions about the grant profile. Okay, so let's pop over to the funders. And it takes a while because it's loading and loading and loading. And I was told, don't worry, there's just a lot in their database. So 636 funders. The first thing you're going to notice is that when you hover over this one with the stripes, it says it's inactive. And I've decided I don't want to look at historical inactive funders. So I'm going to click over here and I want to say only show active funders. There are plenty of people who do historical research on past funders. And so that's why those are left in there. So we've got the funder type. Do we care? Do we just want to look for government agencies? Do we want to look for those funders that only pre-select? That is, you know, again, depending on your needs, those particular filters are available. We're back to geographic focus, same buttons as before. This time I'm going to say Colorado statewide. That put us down to 241. And then area of interest. So I can choose my area of interest. It's going to be the same as before. So maybe this time I want to put maybe a playground. I'm going to see if maybe recreation or sports. I need a new playground for my charter school. I'm just making that up. And you know, you can definitely add more than one. So I could say recreation, which puts me to 28. But I could also go up and say education and maybe say K through 12. And now oh, that's weird. 70, did I not read that correctly before? So I have a lot to go through. So again, I've got active funders, Colorado statewide, recreation, education, and K through 12. So now I can go through and I can look at these, and I'm going to guess right here, Aspen Snowmass, I'm going to think that they may not be willing to fund in Colorado Springs, but they might. I know that the Daniels Fund, actually that's different. The Daniels Fund down here, they only fund in the Metro Denver area. So you have to decide how you want to search. And you may discover that searching Colorado statewide is too wide, right? It's too broad. I've got 70 funders to go through. But I'm going to let's look at the Buell Foundation and see what their profile looks like. And again, we have options of going to their website, looking at their social media. We found out what their EIN number is, what type of a funder they are. So they're a Colorado Foundation and Trust. They fund statewide. What areas of interest? Again, we've got our quick navigation panel on that side. Again, our our purpose, and if they've got any open grant opportunities, they're going to tell you what their grant opportunities are. And their application criteria. Again, we're going to read through that very carefully to make sure that our organization falls in with their grant criteria. And of course, we're going to look really closely at the restrictions. You have to be a 501c3. And more, so they're saying they're not going to fund individuals. That's fine. They don't fund endowments. They don't fund construction programs. But then you're going to see who else was funded by them. So you could say to yourself, oh, you know what? I'm really similar to the Boulder Head Start program, and they got $60,000 in 2020. I may have a better chance now of getting this grant because their organization, this funder has funded organizations similar to mine. And so that is something to think about as you are searching. So boy, they funded a lot. Oh, so we can look at their 990s. So the most recent 990 is 2019. You can get lots of great information out of a 990 if you want to troll through that. You can see what their highest grant award in Colorado was and their lowest grant award. Again, you're looking to see if that fits in with your needs. You can see who the leadership is. And again, that contact information. So maybe I'm going to contact Bill because he's the grants manager and talk to him and just make sure that we're a good fit for this organization before I go through the effort of, sending in my grant or my proposal to them. So that is the down and dirty of Colorado Grants Guide. And again, there's that Excel spreadsheet. So I could get a spreadsheet of all 70 funders. And again, it's just sometimes a really nice thing to have to use. And this is a great way to get some on a sheet right ahead of time. Any questions about Colorado Grants Guide? Because we've just got a couple minutes left. Okay. Oops. Let's see. Oh, it is. Veronica, it's a great tool and it's a great jumping off point because if you can learn how to use Colorado Grants Guide effectively, you'll be able to also use Foundation Directory. I will tell you that sometimes I find things in Colorado Grants Guide that I don't find in Foundation Directory. Foundation Directory sometimes is just so big and so overwhelming that maybe some things get lost and I just can't find what I'm looking for. So, so that's a suggestion. So real quick, I'm just going to blaze through a few more slides. We've talked about contacting the funder. You don't have to know somebody to get a grant, but it certainly can help. So maybe somebody on your board knows somebody else on another board. You can always look at a corporation's website. You can set up a Google alert to find out if a funder is releasing a new grant or any other information. If you set up a Google alert, like here I did for the El Pomar Foundation, that means into my inbox, I get all news about the El Pomar Foundation. And sometimes they put in information about a new grant or their grant has just opened. Grant Station is another option. Sometimes you can find reduced prices for Grant Station. I always talk about it, but I'm like, you get free access to Foundation Directory and Colorado Grants Guide, but some people do use Grant Station. Be Civic, it's an you can look again for corporate sponsors on bcivic.org. And Good 360, this is a really amazing organization. You can register your nonprofit. So say you run a homeless shelter, you register your nonprofit, and Bed Bath & Beyond is got a whole box of, I don't know, hairbrushes and towels, and they will give them to your homeless shelter, but you cannot resell them. There's some rules and regulations, but you can receive those donations and put them directly back into your nonprofit. And so you can register with good360.com. So look at this, you've done all your work, and you're like, what do I do now? So some don't want the full proposal off the bat. They often will talk about a letter of intent or letter of inquiry. Again, you're going to do your homework so that you know what is the right initial approach. So you might have, they might want an LOI, which is kind of like a mini proposal. That's usually a couple pages. You probably will, pick up the phone or send an email. You've got in your handouts. All right, Linda, we'll see you later. You've got how to craft an elevator pitch. So that's always good to have, that you've got that succinct elevator pitch pulled together, so that when you make that phone call or that email, or you run into somebody at a party, you can quickly tell them all about your organization and its organization's needs, right? I've also given you 2 handouts that you can walk through and look at your readiness. And I recommend going through those as well. So, be prepared, do your research, and work hard at going through and finding the best match possible for your organization. And when you do that and you start that relationship with that funder, it can last a really long time. And that's going to help your organization and its funding for the long haul. So that is what I've got.